Well, thank you. And so I've been asked today to just kind of share my own faith journey with you. And happy to have my brothers here, Mark, and some colleagues from work. So thank you. And so I'm 60 this year. So I was born in Peterborough, and my dad worked at General Electric as a draftsman there. And when I was about 4, he went back to school to be a teacher. And the only teaching job he could get was up in North Bay, so the whole family packed up and moved up to there when I was 4. And so that's where my formative years were until I came down to university. And so I grew up in kind of a mainline type of church. And I'm not sure when in the process, but basically in elementary, high school, I lost my faith. And not sure I really had it to start with, but kind of for me, just thinking about it, the types of things that contributed to that was, I think in school I was taught that really there doesn't need to be a God. The whole universe just came into existence by itself. And it just kind of evolved by itself. There's no need for God. And so looking back from the perspective now, so I now have the tools to look at that. So I went to school later for engineering. And, you know, if I were to Google, if you were to Google actually, where did the Big Bang happen? You can get a really strange answer. According to Wikipedia, it happened everywhere all at once. Now you were taught that it came from this speck of, nothing and then a tiny speck like that. Now how does it happen everywhere all at once? From nothing for no reason, right? And you are made out of mass, and so am I. Mass is just energy and information. So it's possible for some very strong being to just say, let there be light, and to create everything from nothing. In that scenario, you could create everything all at once, right, from nowhere. And similarly with life, as a scientist, we can't create life. We can't create the simplest form of life, say an amoeba. We cannot do it. All the scientists in the world cannot do it. And we have laboratories, we can make whatever conditions we want. In the real world, you only have one condition, whatever's there in the world at that time. We still can't do it. Even if I let you cheat, here's an amoeba, we're just going to kill it, put it in, poke a hole in it, put it in a glass of water. You've got all the parts, you've got all the DNA, you've got everything there, make it alive. We cannot do it. But we think that it happened by chance somewhere. And then when you look at life, it doesn't just start with, it's hundreds of different types of life all at once kind of thing, like when you look in the records and stuff like that. And so anyway, the more I look back now with the benefit of learning, whatever field of science you're in, or any endeavor, at the bottom of it, you're going to find God. But we don't get that far in elementary school, right? And so we get these simplistic. So anyway, I basically had lost interest in that time. And so, that wasn't an issue for the church I was in. Like even the head of that church didn't believe either and said it publicly. And so anyway, these people don't believe it. Why would I believe it, right? And so anyway, I ended up going to university, came down to University of Waterloo here, and didn't go to church the whole time. And I just basically fell away, and because, it's not worth my time, I thought. And so anyway, a good friend of mine, when he was 13, became a Christian through a televangelist. And we argued about Christianity for 10 years, literally. And so anyway, one time, the last year of university, I'm like 23, he says, I'm not an idiot. I got reasons for what I believe. What you should do is just check it out. And if there's nothing to it, then forget all about it and just live your life. But if there's something to it, you got to do something. So I never thought a Christian would say that because I didn't think there was actually anything behind it, right? Or that it was worth looking into. Or even the fear that what if you looked into it and it was all a lie? Because in the secular worldview, there's nothing, no hope, no nothing, right? And so if you don't look into it, at least you got that in the back of your mind that there might be something. But if you look into it and there is nothing, then you're really in trouble. So anyway, that was good encouragement for me to look into it. And so I spent about 2 years. And so, I was raised in a North American environment where Christianity was prevalent. And so I thought, well, okay, I don't want to just look at that. So I also looked at, Buddhism and Hinduism and Muslim and everything, right? And then you get really confused because everybody thinks they're right and everybody else is wrong, right? They can all be wrong, but they can't all be right. And then that comes down to, you have to find something common in all of them. And so the common element is actually Jesus, because everybody believes something about Jesus and they're mutually exclusive, right? So the prophet, Muslims would believe he's a prophet. Other people would say he's a good moral teacher. Other people would say he's just crazy. Some people say he's God. Well, if this guy goes around saying he's God and he's not God, he's not a good teacher. He's a cult leader, right? And so he's not a prophet either. He's not speaking for God if he thinks he's God himself, right? And so anyway, that comes down to, okay, that would be a way to figure out what's right. Well, that comes down to Jesus, they say, show us a sign, do something, right? He says, I'm not going to show you any except for the sign of Jonah, where Jonah was dead for 3 days, basically, and came back to life, in the whale. And he says, you destroy this temple, and in 3 days I'll raise it up, meaning his body. So he's saying that's the proof of who he is. So if that's true, then the rest of what he says is true. If that's not true, the rest of what he says isn't true, right? Okay, so did the resurrection happen or not? So that comes down to who you believe, right? And so the Jews of the day would say the disciples stole the body. But basically, you're confronted, there is no body, because Christianity started in Jerusalem, right? If it started somewhere else, you could believe it, but it started in Jerusalem. If these guys go around saying this guy rose from the dead and he didn't, you just show them the body. Millions of people have seen him. He's got holes in all the right places. Christianity's over on day one. So the Romans didn't have the body, the Jews didn't have the body, right? So that leads you to, okay, the disciples stole the body, right? So then, that's the story that went around at the day, the disciples stole the body. And so then you look at their lives. And so when you look at their lives, as we went through a couple weeks ago, right, they all died horribly, separately, right? And let's say you've been following the wrong guy for 3 years, right? And he's dead. The smart thing to do, if you want to continue at all, would be to just take his sayings and just go on with those. The only thing objectionable about Jesus is actually that he claimed to be God. Take that part out, none of them would be killed, right? The fact that they're claiming he rose from the dead is the only reason they're dead themselves, is they would not give up on that. Why wouldn't they give up on that? Because they believed it to the point of death, right? So there's no story of any of them ever going back on this, even though they were waffling and, while he's with them even, right? And so after about a year, I came to the conclusion, these guys believe their story's true. The story's true or not true, but these guys believed it was true. So then I thought, okay, well, maybe they're hallucinating. Well, you don't have 12 people hallucinate the same thing at the same time, and you're not going to, and you still got a body problem, right? Show them a body, and right, and it's over. So anyway, that took me about a year, and so after about a year, okay, it's true. This guy rose from the dead, and therefore you need to listen to the rest of what he had to say. But I don't want to be a Christian. And so by that point, I knew what Christianity was. It's your whole life, every area of your life, your finances, your romance, your career, everything. And so I didn't want to give up that. So then what I did is I set up my own standards. This is how I'm going to live my life. And over the next year, God showed me, forget about your standards, or my standards. You can't even live up to your own standards, right? And so after about a year, I thought, well, the reason I'm not a Christian is because I want to live my own life, but I can't even live the type of life I want to live anyway. So this was August, September 1990. So I got out of bed, prayed, went back to bed. That was it. And just gradually things started to change. And so gradually, so I'm 25 now, I'm in my career, and things started to change. And then I was able to, follow God in a lot of areas of my life, but not at work. And so at work, hey Lisa, you just joined our company, that's great. It'd be good to train you up and whatnot, but it might take me longer to train you than use somebody else, so I'm going to use somebody else because I might look bad, right? So what was happening is there was something more important to me at work than following God, and that was my career. My career was my idol. That was my identity. I'm an engineer, right? That was my provider. That was my security. And these are all things you're supposed to be getting from God. So what happened was I have an apartment that I rented out in the basement of my house. And this girl was renting it from me. And she, one night, I would cook supper for her one night, we could, just to be in touch. And she's writing this letter to this hotel that she worked at like 10 years before, apologizing for stealing this silverware. I said, well, that's really crazy. And then I'm up in bed later and said, well, you took some stuff. So basically I was a co-op student and I'd taken these desk supplies and stuff like that for work, or for school. So, nobody cares. Everybody does it. And this wouldn't go away. So after about a week, okay, I'll put it back. So I put it back because I was still working at the company. I was full-time now at the company I'd been in co-op, so I put it back. And I still couldn't get any rest about it. So, you need to tell somebody. Well, the person who runs the supply room isn't there anymore. And my boss isn't the same. My boss's boss isn't the same. The only guy who's the same is the guy who runs the company. Now, I'm really going to tell him that I took this stuff? And so what happened was, so after a couple of weeks, okay, I'll tell him tomorrow, right? And I woke up, I forgot all about it. And there's a note to go see this guy. So I go see him, and whatever it was done, and he says, oh, is there something else? I said, well, yeah, a couple of years ago, I took this stuff, and I put it back, and I just thought you should know. Oh, all right then. So interesting thing is, it's very small, but it's very tough. So what it did is it put following God ahead of following my career, right? And it killed that part. So I don't have to be president of our stewards. I can be a crossing guard. It doesn't really matter, right? It killed that part of me. Then, you see that we go to Uganda and South Sudan. Those are much, much easier than telling this guy that, right? And so the small stuff is the hard stuff, and that's what really changes you inside. So anyway, so then I started doing both, engineering, and I would take leaves of absence and go do volunteer projects, which I couldn't do before because then I'd have to tell somebody I was a Christian, which I wouldn't do before. And so I would take these leaves of absence, but it was getting harder and harder working for a normal consulting company because, they're used to, okay, if you work 40 hours, that's great. If I can get you to work another 10 hours, then I get 3 times the profit because I've already paid you and whatnot, right? And so this kind of mentality, and so here's this guy taking leaves of absence, that's not a good example, right? So eventually I decided, well, my ladder's on the wrong wall. I gotta start my own company. So I quit in 2000 and started my own company, just me in my living room, and starting from scratch, and there's a whole stories about that if you want or whatever. And I'll put the textbook in the library here. So we just had a textbook come out a few weeks ago. That's what I wish I learned in engineering 35 years ago, which I wished I learned in the business classes 35 years ago. But it's also got this journey of Enviro Stewards as one of the case studies in there. But anyway, so eventually I decided I had to start my own company. And so I started my own company. And so where you can do both volunteer and engineering. And so, yeah.
How old were you then?
25.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, thanks. Sorry, no, I wasn't. I was 25 when I became a Christian. 35. Yep. Which plus 25 gives brings me to 60. So it's our 25th anniversary of the company, and now we're about 19 people. So we add about one person every year so that we can grow sustainably and we've never laid anybody off. We've done work share and other things to get by in situations, but we try to do it. And so EnviroStewards itself is built on the premise of honor God, serve people, care for creation. And so EnviroStewards, a steward is somebody who looks after your stuff on your behalf. It comes from people who look after a house for somebody, right? So interestingly, the very first job given to man was a steward of creation before the fall, right? It was working with God, gardening, right? And that never went away. And so often in my line of work, it's sad how few Christians understand this. Like, I'll be at these conferences and whatnot, and there'll be a lot of people committed to the environment, but not necessarily the Christians in that. And it comes from a kind of a false understanding. Hey, we're not here forever. This earth is temporary. So we'll just trash the place and leave, right? So if my tenant, they're not there permanently either. If they were to trash my apartment, I wouldn't be very happy, and I wouldn't feel very respected. So if we wipe out species that God created, that's not honoring to God, right? And so we don't worship creation. We worship the person who created creation, right? But it doesn't mean you don't care for it. So anyway, interestingly, vocation means voice. And so your vocation gives you an opportunity to have a voice. So we can have a voice in that setting about that kind of thing, right? And so over the years, it's kind of grown. I'm now at the point of kind of transition. So handing over to training up the next level of leadership of EnviroStewards and of the safe water work that we do. And some of you have been to the events that we do. And again, even on the safe water work. So I started the company with, I set aside about 20% of my time for charitable work. And so about 10% was local charity, 10% was international. And I booked every Thursday afternoon off for 10 years, literally, and went to Ray of Hope, where Harry was, right? And if it was for any other reason, nobody would say anything. But if it's for that, that's weird, right? And so, but no, this is to show that it's possible, right? And every employee gets 24 hours paid volunteer time if they want. So anyway, eventually was asked to go to South Sudan, went to South Sudan and found out that the women were walking 3 miles to the nearest well. When we tested the well, there's E. coli in the well, even though it's the well at the hospital. And so I brought a water treatment system so they could treat the water, and then later they asked to be taught how to do it, and we all went on a trip there too, right? When was that? 2009, right? Making the projects bigger, teaching them how, and so the interesting thing is, when I speak to students, I say, if this is your ship, a lot of people want to get the rudder exactly right before they start moving. And they spend a lot of time just figuring this out. Even if you had the right spot, you're still accomplishing nothing. Just get sort of right and start, and you can always adjust it. So say in South Sudan, like the way we do it now is different than when we started, because you learn as you go, right? And again, as Christians, you have an opportunity. A good charity can come in as somebody's equal. A Christian can come in as somebody's servant, right? So the projects over there, we don't own any of them. We don't run any of them. We don't make the decisions at any of them. We set them up, build them up so they can make their own decisions, run their own projects. They start a brand new project without us going at all during COVID because of this information transfer and training. And that respects dignity. It's, they can run anything at that point, right? And so it's really good to just rethink, and we have a TED Talk on it too if you want, called Better Than Charity, on just, as North Americans, we have the wrong understanding because every commercial you've ever seen is relief work. And all engineering stuff is, go for this disaster relief. Well, there was a problem even before they had this disaster. They're going to have a problem afterwards. You have to go back and fix the system. So one of the nice things about engineering too, so we hire a lot of engineers, not because we're going to use what they were taught, but they have an understanding of how to learn, and an understanding of systems. And if I change this part of the system, it's going to have this effect over here. So when I was taking the leaves of absence, one of them was in New Hampshire at a farm called His Mansion. And people would go to get off of drugs, alcohol. Even that girl in the basement, she went there for bulimia. And, they had, she was in my basement. She was a baker, even though she had struggled with that. She was the chief cook at that ministry for a while. She was helping in the crisis pregnancy center. She wasn't just getting by, right? And so this was started by actually 3 engineers. They said, what's wrong with society? So this is way back in the 70s, the drug culture and whatnot, right? And, in their analysis, before that, you would work with your dad in the field, with your mom, right? And you learn from them as you're doing it. Now, kids don't even know what their parents even do, right? And so that was one thing. And so they kind of took a look back at what's wrong with this and how do we adjust that system, right? And so people would go for a year, and we grew most of our own food. And it was very successful. Half the staff there used to be there for help, right? And so this kind of thing is very helpful. And so, so you saw those passages, right? And so that were read. So the Matthew passage, love the Lord with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength, right? My problem was my mind. I used to think, okay, you can't do it because I can't get my mind around it. I'd like to believe this, but it's contrary. Then that changed to, actually, this world actually doesn't make sense without the Creator, right? And so that was a hurdle for me in that journey or whatever. The other one, I don't know if you remember the passage, there's a lot of stuff about clothes in that one, right? So David's putting on Saul's armor to go fight Goliath. And it's awkward, he can't walk, so he just takes it off. But later on, there's that thing with Jonathan, Saul's son. So they form a covenant. David puts on Jonathan's princely robe. Jonathan puts on David's shabby shepherd, whatever he's wearing, and has a staff or whatever, and change weapons. Well, what's that all about, right? So it's interesting because when people would see David then walking around town, they say, he's friends with a prince, right? If they see the prince walking around with this shabby thing, they say, oh, he's friends with that grubby shepherd guy, right? And somebody attacks Jonathan, he doesn't even have his sword anymore, right? David's got it. So it's David's job to defend Jonathan. But it's an interesting analogy for God and us, right? So our sins, like everybody has sinned, and you can see it in Psalms, everywhere, that basically sin is just falling short of what doing things wrong or not doing things that you should be doing. And so all of us can think of things that we haven't done and things that we've done. And so what's heaven going to be like? So heaven is to be with God. Hell is to be separated from God, right? Which seems like hell because you've lost this opportunity to be with your Creator, right? So, but in heaven, if we all just bring all of our sin there, we keep murdering people and stealing from each other, that's not going to work either. So somehow we have to be separated from our sin, which we cannot do. Doesn't matter how many good things you do. If I were to hit somebody, strike them and kill them with my vehicle, doesn't matter how many good things I do, I'm still accountable for that, right? And so how can we be separated? And so if we go to a store and Faith breaks a vase, she owes that store for that vase. As her dad, I can actually pay for that vase. Now she doesn't owe for it anymore, right? So if Jesus is just a person, he cannot pay for our sins. If he's our Creator, he can. He doesn't have to, but he can choose to, right? And so, in that scenario with Jonathan and David, the same way that Jonathan put on his grubby, Jesus put on our sins. So when God looked at Jesus on the cross, he saw our sins and turned away from him, right? And punished him, right? When he looks at us, he sees Jesus' righteousness on us. Oh, that's my son. Come on in. And so it's very strange. Like, this would not be something you would come up with. We would like to say, oh, I earned my way into heaven, right? We didn't. There's no way we can. And so I want to share with you from, everybody probably knows this verse already, like John 3:16, but let me just back it up a little bit before that. Okay, so this is the Gospel of John. In 13, and no man hath ascended up to heaven, but he that came down from heaven, even the Son of Man, which is in heaven, which would be Jesus, obviously, right? And as Moses lifted up the serpent in the wilderness, even so the Son of Man must be lifted up, which means crucified, basically, right? Lifted up, that whosoever believeth in him should not perish, but have eternal life. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth in him should not perish, but have everlasting life. For God sent not his Son into the world to condemn the world, but that the world through him might be saved. He that believeth on him is not condemned, but he that believeth not is condemned already, because he has not believed in the name of the only begotten Son of God. So I used to believe that Christians were pretty arrogant to say that there's only one way, right? A lot of faiths nowadays say, oh, there's many, many ways, right? Why would they say there's only one way? And so this arrogance, you can see it maybe in Christians, and then that comes back to Jesus saying, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. Well, that's pretty arrogant, except if you look at his character. This is the most humble person you've ever seen, right? Is he being arrogant by saying he's the only way? If there are more than one way, then he is being arrogant. If there's only one way, let's say you're mountain climbing, right? And you meet somebody, say, okay, this next bit, to get there, there's only one way. You got to go through here, here, here. Is that person being arrogant? No. If they say, oh, just go any way you want, right? And you fall off the mountain or whatever, right? So it's not arrogant if it is the only way. And when you think about it, the reason why it's the only way is because of who he is, not his teaching, who he actually is. If he is your creator, then he has the authority to pay for your sin. He can pay. He doesn't have to, but he planned to. He came from the creation of the world. Right from Garden of Eden, he started making provisions to win us back, right? And to pay for it because he wants this relationship. And he doesn't have to, but he does. And so that's what I just want to encourage with you, and even say at the end of John 3. Let me see here. Okay. At the end of that chapter, for the Father loveth the Son, and hath given him all things into his hand. He that believeth on the Son hath everlasting life, and he that believeth not the Son shall not see life, but the wrath of God abideth on him. It's not that God puts it on him, it's already there. We've already sinned. We're already separated from God. It's that we haven't taken this lifeline out, right? God's not condemning anybody, he's just, you're already condemned because of this, right? And so there's this opportunity, and so I just want to encourage you that happy to talk about any of those things at any time with anybody, and this is just a story of God's intervention in my life. So if that hadn't happened 35 years ago, I would be in a corporate structure somewhere or other doing something that's not going to last a long time, right? And so really the only thing that's going to last a long time is you and everybody, right? And so any impact you have on anybody is a lasting thing. Anything that you build is only going to last a few decades at most. So I just want to encourage you, and thank you very much.